Welcome back to the channel, and today back in the boring old car again. Hope you don't mind that, but I have been very surprised, very pleasantly surprised. Let me just straighten you up, there we go. Very pleasantly surprised by the number of people who've actually asked for more of these. So fine, if you're happy to listen to me droning on about anything or nothing, I will keep popping these up from time to time until you say, "Oi, Wheeler, enough." Until that time presents itself, I'll do these. Maybe once, I don't know, once a fortnight, something like that. See how it goes. So, first things first, a little bit of admin. I have myself a website, and it seems that everybody who's anybody currently on YouTube has a website linked to the channel. So I thought I'd better jump on the old bandwagon and set one up. So if you've got some spare time, why not take a look? www.thebingleywheeler.com. And I think there's only 3 pages up and running at the moment, but if you take a look at that, you can see a few little things that you might find interesting, like a bit more background about me, a bit about the bikes that I currently own, and a page about the bikes that I've previously owned, or certainly the bikes that I've owned in the last 10 years or so. So that's that out of the way. Next bit of admin, shout out and thanks to the All Year Motorcyclist. You keep plugging me, buddy, and I do appreciate it, absolutely. And thank you for your very, very kind comments about my recent critiques from the car. Because this is like, it's just like having a conversation with somebody in the car. Except I don't have to keep my earlugs attuned for any responses. So it's a bit easier on the old Britneys this way. And of course, if I start boring you, you can just turn me off, can't you? So that's fairly straightforward. But that's what it's like to me. It's just like a bit of a conversation to you, my esteemed viewer. But yeah, All Year Motorcyclist, go give him some love on his channel. Link in the description below. Thanks for the mention and thanks for the kind words. And last but not least, to my good friend Gazza, VFR Mitch. If you go look his channel up, VFR Mitch. And he's got a couple of Royal Enfields, he's got an Interceptor, and he's got a Himalayan. And he's got the full fat Himalayan, not the scram. And so if you hook up with that channel, I think in due course there'll be some interesting videos about mods to either or both bikes. So where for today then? Right, well, as the title suggests, this is about us and our occasionally uneasy relationship with pedal cyclists. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not a verbal onslaught, this is not a critique on pedal cyclists in general, because I used to be quite a prolific pedal cyclist. And where things are going, I might have to go back being one, mightn't I, at this rate. But that said, we do have an occasionally uneasy relationship with pedal cycles. And when you see cyclists on the road, very occasionally, and I think it is the exception, but very occasionally they do seem to behave in a way that can only be described as thoroughly unreasonable given the circumstances and the road conditions. And I've been asked a time or two, well, is there ever anything that we can do about this? Are they doing anything wrong? Are they committing any offences? Well, the answer to that question in broad terms is yes, possibly they are. And I'll go through that. But before I go through it and you think, bloody hell, Wheeler, do you know what you're talking about here? Some of you may know that I'm a retired copper, I'm a retired police officer. So I joined the police in 1983, I retired in 2013. having completed a full 30 years of service, because that's the optimum, or that was the optimum service period for my cohort. And in that time, just briefly, the first half of that career, the first 15 years, I was a constable and a sergeant in Bradford, various parts of Bradford. And in the second half of that career, the final 15 years, I was an inspector working right across the district, basically. So I worked extensively in Leeds, which for those of you that don't know is one of the biggest cities in the UK, certainly probably the biggest in the north of England once you get beyond Manchester. And I worked in Wakefield and Huddersfield and Dewsbury and Keighley and one or two other places as well. So quite varied. And sort of the last sort of 5 years of my career were in what you would call specialist operations, specialist operational policing, and that'd be stuff like tactical firearms command, major incident command, major events command, events planning, big events, that sort of thing, and things like communications, the National Police Air Service, which was newly formed back then. So that's sort of my 30-year career in a nutshell. However, 2 years, well, in fact just over 2 years of that 30 years, I was a traffic cop. Yes, the old white top traffic cop. So don't be switching off now, because I've got some useful information for you if you're not already clued up on this when it comes to our esteemed brethren who pedal away on two wheels. So, any road up, yeah. So I was a traffic cop for just over 2 years, working out of Bradford again. Now, to become a traffic cop, you've got a few hoops to jump through, but basically the two main things really. You've got to pass a police advanced driving course, and you've got to pass a traffic law course. So the police advanced driving course, so that's a really intensive 4-week course. Now the police, and certainly back in the day, there were various different driving courses depending on what level you were being pitched at. So just to drive a Panda car, something like a Vauxhall Chevette or a Ford Escort as it would have been back then, to drive one of those, you needed to complete what was called a short standard driving course. Having said that, we're 3 weeks long, and that was sort of at the level of the civilian, for want of a better term, IAM and ROSPA driving courses, driving qualifications that you can get, advanced driving qualifications. So it was like that with bits bolted on. But the police advanced driving course, that's a 4-week solid course of driving and theory, involving mock pursuits and work with a helicopter and all sorts of very exciting things, to be honest. One of the best courses that the police have to offer if if a cop chooses to go down that particular route at any given point in his or her career. Fantastic course, but it is a pass or fail test at the end of it, and that's at a completely different level altogether, as you can imagine, because very few people indeed will ever be required to drive at high speed in pursuit situations and things of that nature. So it's a tough course without a shadow of a doubt. So you've got to pass that, and then there's a traffic law course, which is 3 weeks solid of learning road traffic law, which is criminal law. A lot of people think road traffic law is different to criminal law, but it ain't. It's all part of the criminal law because it's all statutory law, i.e. law that's made via the passing of an Act of Parliament, where you get an act and a section, rather than civil law and common law. So I won't bore you with any more details around that, but you had to pass that law course as well. And then when you pass that law course, it was a bit daft really, but you got this white cover for your hat. And you'll have seen them, these traffic cops with the white cover on top of the flat cap, and to be fair, all it is, it's like a pair of incontinence knickers with leg holes sewn up. You know, it's not special. It's not special. Some forces had posh ones with white tops built in, but we didn't. We just got this like this pair of knickers put over the top of your hat, and then you were suddenly transformed into this mythical creature that were qualified to do all sorts of things. But anyway, the only reason sort of give you that little pen picture is so that I can talk with a little bit of authority without you turning off prematurely about the law as it impacts upon all of us as road users, motorcyclists, but also pedal cyclists. So so when you're doing this here traffic law course, obviously end at 3 weeks, and if you pass it, there's virtually no you don't know about traffic law, but it's heavily rooted, or the core of it is heavily rooted in a thing called the Road Traffic Act. And back when I did that course in 1993, which is when I was in road traffic, back then it was basically the Road Traffic Act of 1972. It's since been amended, or a big set of amendments, I think in 1988, and there have been several since, to adopt to changing circumstances in society. But it was basically the Road Traffic Act, and it's a very hierarchical act. So the most serious offence under the Road Traffic Act, Section 1, which is causing death by, or was causing death by reckless driving, it's now called causing death by dangerous driving. Section 2 is just reckless driving, or was, and is now dangerous driving. And Section 3 was driving without due care and attention, and we still have that offence of driving without due care and attention. But there's another little leg of legislation, another little subsection under the driving without due care and attention bit, which says, or driving without reasonable consideration for other road users. And people have been prosecuted for that in the past, particularly car drivers. So let's have a think about that then. Well, first off, the reason they changed it from reckless to dangerous, it's a little bit anarchic, this, but basically, in terms of proving the evidence, it was very, very difficult to secure convictions for reckless driving or death by reckless driving, because you've got to prove reckless, and reckless is quite reckless isn't deliberate, is it? But neither is it just careless. It sits in between the two. So there were two stated cases that used to sort of define recklessness. One was called RV Caldwell and the other was called RV Cunningham. So you had Caldwell recklessness and Cunningham recklessness. And I won't bore you with the difference between the two. You can Google it. There's a subtle difference between the two, but it was always quite difficult to establish which one was which. In a case of somebody that had been driving recklessly, or might have, God forbid, killed somebody through driving recklessly. So they brought in this amendment, called it dangerous driving. But the one that's always stopped there is the driving without due care and attention. Now, there are aggravated forms these days of that offence in relation to death or injury that you might cause as a result, or being OPL over the prescribed limit, or unfit through drink or drugs, for example. And just as an aside, the offence of driving over the prescribed limit, breathalyser job, and the offence of driving whilst unfit through drink, brackets or drugs, they are two separate offences. They're different. But we won't go into that today. So, what about pedal cyclists then? Well, let's start off with the positives. What can we say that's good about pedal cyclists and cycling in general? Well, for a kick-off, it keeps the nation healthy for those that do it, which I suppose eases the pressure on a highly pressurised National Health Service here in the UK at the moment. And that can only be a good thing. It can only be a good thing generally, can't it, if you're thinking about it, a healthy population. They don't pollute the atmosphere. They don't tend to kill and injure other road users except themselves occasionally. They don't normally cause damage to the road infrastructure. So those are the plus points, aren't they? And they're quite laudable points in and of themselves, I would suggest. But the flip side of the coin, I suppose, and we've all encountered it, is there can be a real problem, particularly when they're riding two abreast on a road. There can be a real annoyance when they are arbitrarily disregarding traffic signals such as red traffic lights and no entry signs. And I suppose if you're going to embark upon a critique of pedal cyclists, you start off from a position of weakness, because certainly in terms of the highway code and the way that's been recently revised, and I touched on this in an earlier video, that they are at the forefront of vulnerability when it comes to road users. I would suggest second only to pedestrians, really. So it's incumbent upon other motorcycles higher up in the hierarchy, other vehicles higher up in the hierarchy, of which motorcycles and cars and goods vehicles are obviously members. It's incumbent upon them to give the benefit of the doubt and the margin of safety to pedestrians and pedal cyclists, and horse riders for that matter. So there are all sorts of nuances to the argument if you're minded to embark upon a debate as to whether on balance pedal cycles are a good or a bad thing. Depends where you're sitting. But is there any legislation that covers them? Well, yeah, there is, and it is actually under the Road Traffic Act. And just as it's an offence to drive a motor vehicle on a road without reasonable consideration for other road users, so it is an offence to ride a pedal cycle on the road without due care and attention or reasonable consideration for other road users. And no, I keep bobbing and weaving here because I am paying due care and attention to the road. Right, there we go. So where were we? So yeah, that offence exists there for pedal cyclists. So where have cars been prosecuted for this this little bit that talks about without reasonable consideration for other road users? Because it's almost sounds like a bit of legislated for courtesy, doesn't it? Right, it's going to be a criminal offence if you're not courteous on the road, and that's no bad thing. I mean, it'll cover things like driving through a puddle and drenching somebody on pavement. It'll cover that sort of thing. People have been prosecuted in the past for driving cars so slowly on a road with, say, a 40 or 50 or 60 limit as to cause a huge tailback of traffic for no good reason, such as mechanical failure of the vehicle or something else, and have been successfully prosecuted for driving without reasonable consideration for other road users in those fairly limited circumstances. So for pedal cycles, what I'd suggest is this, and apply your mind to this scenario, because if you're like me, you'll have come across this time and time again. And that's a situation where you're riding down the road, and coming towards you on the other side of the road there'll be a couple of cyclists, two abreast, and behind them will be a line of cars, a line of other traffic, and you'll be able to see this endless line of faces of thunder from the drivers, because they've been itching to get past these two bikes that are side by side having a conversation ordinarily. And what happens, lo and behold, as soon as they spy you, the motorcyclist, car driver thinks, this is my chance, bike, a lot narrower than a car, I can get through. And what they will do then, they'll go for the overtake. They'll go for the overtake, and they will, that wasn't me by the way, they'll go for the overtake, and they'll encroach upon your bubble of safety, which ain't good. Now, don't get me wrong, the primary liability there is always with the car driver in those circumstances, both because of this hierarchical thing in the highway code where it's the responsibility of that car driver to give you, the motorcyclist, as somebody further down that hierarchy, if you like. The obligation is on that car driver to afford you that margin of safety. But by the same token, and this wouldn't really manifest itself unless as a consequence of that manoeuvre there was some sort of accident, God forbid causing serious injury, but there will be a prima facie offence on the part of the outermost of those pedal cyclists of riding a pedal cycle on a road without reasonable consideration for other road users. Now, the occasions upon which you would secure such a prosecution are few and far between. For a kick-off, you know, the age of dash cams and smartphones counts for nothing when push bikes aren't required to have any form of identifying marks or features, such as a registration plate. So in the absence of there being some sort of incident and the cyclist stopping and all the circumstances being brought to light through collective evidence, in the absence of that, you'd be hard pressed, wouldn't you, to secure any sort of prosecution, unless you personally knew who that cyclist was, and then it'd look very much like a personal vendetta, wouldn't it? But it's there, the offence is there. So the answer to that question, really, at the end of the day, is there something that can be done in relation to pedal cyclists when they ride on the road in that manner? The answer is yes, there is. There is a provision there for it. How easy would it be to avail oneself of that provision is a very big question, and I would suggest there would have to be some causal involvement in an incident or accident to actually bring a prosecution about in those circumstances. But it is there. So I just thought you might find that interesting, because if you ever have cause to have an argument with, don't pick arguments with pedal cyclists. They're normally a lot fitter than us bike riders and car drivers. You might come off worse. Don't pick an argument with a pedal cyclist. But if one picks an argument with you, in those circumstances, you might want to say, actually, do you realise that you're committing an offence under the Road Traffic Act by riding without reasonable consideration for other road users? And you really would have to show certain aggravating factors like the length of time for which it had been going on and the amount of disruption that it had caused to other road users. But it's there, isn't it? So quite interested in that. And I think there's a boatload of road traffic legislation. It's a bit of a nightmare. There's more of it than there is criminal law. I always find it very straightforward to learn the Theft Act. You know, definition of theft. You know, dishonest appropriation of a property belonging to another with the intention of permanently depriving that other of it. And I learned that in 1983. And to me, that's quite a straightforward definition under the Theft Act of 1968. You know, and deception, dishonestly obtaining property from another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. And there's all these offences that are reasonably easy to learn when you're a young cop. But traffic legislation, it's so black and white, and it's got unique elements in it, like there's something called an offence of strict liability. So permitting the use of a vehicle without insurance is an offence of strict liability. It's no good saying you didn't know there were no insurance covering the person that you're allowed to drive your car. It's no good saying you didn't know, because you'll still be guilty. So it's a bit, it can be a little bit black and white, can road traffic legislation, to be fair, and very hard to learn, particularly when you get into goods vehicles and maximum permissible weights and operators licensing and all of that. But it was a fantastic 2 years of my career, and I think, looking back, the biggest laughs I ever had were while I were in the road traffic department. And of course some really dark times dealing with you know, fatal accidents and accidents where people were very seriously injured. And on a serious note, it is no fun whatsoever to have to go and knock on somebody's door and tell them that they've lost a loved one in a road traffic accident. So there is that side to it. But anyway, let's not end in the dark. Let's try and end in the light. So, alright, that's it for now. I don't think I'm going to edit any of this, so please forgive me if there are any sort of mispronunciations, hiatuses, funny expressions, inadvertent stuttering, or whatever else there might be. I think I'm just going to upload the video the way it is from start to finish, and hope it's of some interest to you. If it is, please click a like, please click a subscribe. It makes a massive difference to the channel. Take a look at that website if you get a chance, www.thebingleywheeler.com. And until the next time, ride safe, be kind, and I'll see you soon. Toodle pip!